In this video, I am going to talk about Hibernate interview questions. This video will contain basics of Hibernate, and these questions will be either directly or indirectly related to the concepts of Hibernate. So let's start. I want specific database independent code in my project. How can I do that? This is indirectly related to the concept of Hibernate, why we use Hibernate, what is Hibernate. So, if you want a specific database independent code in your project, you can use any ORM framework like Hibernate, Byte. Now, the use of the ORM framework like Hibernate and Byte depends upon your business use case. But more or less, Hibernate is a very popular ORM framework. Moving to next question. What is ORM? ORM stands for Object Relational Mapping. It defines how object could be mapped to database. It helps in achieving operations with data. So the basic operations like create, delete, update, retrieving of the records is possible with ORM. Moving to next question. Do you know any ORM framework, or which ORM framework you have used in your project? So the last two previous questions we have asked about the ORM framework. Now the interviewer is asking about the ORM framework you have used in your project. Depending upon the answer, whether it is Hibernate or Byte, the next sets of interview questions will go on the concept of that particular ORM framework. So you can tell Hibernate and Byte are ORM frameworks, and I have used Hibernate as the ORM framework for dealing with data persistence. Moving to next question. I want a specific ORM independent code in my project. How can I do that? Now, this question interviewer may ask to test your knowledge and understanding about ORM framework. Just like we have independent database specific code with ORM, we also have a specific code independent of ORM. To do that, you can use JPA. Again, you are mentioning a new word, JPA. So it is up to the interviewer whether to ask next question with Hibernate or move to the JPA. What is JPA? JPA stands for Java Persistence API, a set of specification independent of ORM framework. Remember the word, it is a set of specification. It provides vast set of methods to deal with data persistence. Moving to next question. What are the advantages of Hibernate over jdbc? Again, the interviewer is back to the basic table creation based on Pojo class, database independent code. You can use SQL, named query, or even native SQL query. Minimize code change when adding additional columns with respect to jdbc use. Provides lazy loading of child classes. Conversion of jdbc exceptions to unchecked exceptions automatically. Two levels of caching, first level and second level, and apart from these two levels of caching, You also have support for query caching, strong support for JPA. Also, you can fine-tune connection pooling using either C3PO or Apache DBCP or Proxul. Moving to next question. In terms of performance, which is fast, Hibernate or jdbc? Again, instead of a direct question to Hibernate, it is testing your understanding about the ORM frameworks. So in terms of performance, still jdbc would be fast because it is native. We write a native SQL query in jdbc. So if you try to visualize the picture where jdbc, ORM framework and JPA stands, it could be like you have a DB where you can perform a CRUD operations. So jdbc would be the basic layer and it has performance for CRUD. On the top of jdbc, we have ORM framework layer. So for case of Hibernate and iBatis, whatever the code you write is finally converted to jdbc and interacted with the database. Similarly, on top of ORM, we have JPA. jdbc is much faster than Hibernate if it comes to deal with only performance. Moving to next question. Can you brief features of Hibernate? Alternate to this question would be, can you explain me advantage of Hibernate over jdbc? The answers to both the questions is more or less same. Hibernate maps Pojo class to database table, so it supports auto table creation, provides SQL named query as well as support for native query. Caching support is provided by Hibernate, so you have two levels of cache, first level and second level. First level is enabled by default. It also provides you query support, lazy loading of child classes. So if you have parent-child relationship, parent class will be loaded and child class will be loaded on demand. Automatic dirty checking. Again, dirty checking is a very important feature of Hibernate. Provides Hibernate validator for validations. For example, you can use @not null to check if the field of an entity class is null or not. Inheritance and association support also. Moving to next question. How would you integrate Hibernate in a project? This question is an uncommon one because no one asks you how you have used or integrated Hibernate in a project. But again, to test your understanding or to know how much depth knowledge you have for your project architecture, an interviewer can ask this question. So if we're using Spring Boot, it provides Spring Boot started data JPA, which will internally provide you Hibernate support. In case of Spring MVC and Maven project, you have to add dependency in pom.xml. You have to configure data source. You have to configure session factory using this data source. Session factory provides session, and to configure a session factory, you would need configuration files. So in Hibernate, you have two types of configuration files mainly: hibernate.cfg.xml and hibernate.hbm.xml. CFG is also called Hibernate configuration file and HBM is Hibernate mapping file. Moving to next question. What are configuration files used in Hibernate? Tell me. So there are mainly two configuration files, hibernate.cfg.xml and hibernate.hbm.xml. Moving to next question. What are things inside configuration file? Or tell me about the content of configuration file hibernate.cfg.xml. Hibernate.cfg.xml is a configuration file and it contains all the configurations for Hibernate. So first tag would be XML tag and then you have Hibernate configuration. When you say this Hibernate configuration tag, this is what an interviewer looks or want to listen. So inside this Hibernate configuration tag, you have session factories tag, and this session factory tag will contain the data source mapping. By the term data source mapping means username, URL of the jdbc, password, driver class to connect, and the properties like hbm2tdl.auto also. And this configuration class also contain your mapping files tag. So you can include your mapping file inside this configuration class using mapping resource. So this configuration class is containing employee.hbm.xml and this employee.hbm.xml is containing how my classes are mapped and what are the fields and the value for that entity class. Moving to next question. What are the things in mapping files or hibernate.hbm.xml? Again, it is an XML file, so first tag would be the XML tag and then it would be Hibernate mapping. Similarly, like hibernate.cfg.xml, interviewer looks to listen for Hibernate mapping property tag. This tag contains the classes to be mapped for the table in the database. So inside this Hibernate mapping tag, we have class tag, and this class have name and the table to bind along with ID generator and the value of the properties fields. Moving to next question. What are the annotations you have used? In my project, the basic annotations we have used were @entity, @ID, @generated value, @table, @column, @not null for validation of the fields, @one-to-one, one-to-many for relational mapping. There are four kinds of relational mapping: one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-many, many-to-one. But mostly @one-to-one and @one-to-many is used. @unique constant, this is placed on the top of the entity class to describe how we are going to fetch an object from the database. @version, @access, @embedded also. Moving to next question. Which interface of Hibernate have you used in your project? Again, this is a very basic question. If you know the answer, it is good. In Hibernate, we have session factory, session and transaction. You may have used this, but you won't realize that these are the interfaces. So in Hibernate, we have three interfaces: session factory, session and transaction. Moving to next question. Tell me more about session factory. In case of session factory, it is used for creation and management of session. It is thread safe. One object of session factory per application. In case of session, it provides CRUD methods for CRUD functionality. It is not a thread safe. One session object per client. When you answer this, interviewer may ask you to write a code for the connections in Hibernate. Moving to next question. Can you write code for creation connection in Hibernate? Now for creation of the connection, you would need data source like URL, the drivers, and username password. All these are present inside your hibernate.cfg.xml. So the first thing you need to do is to load this configuration file. To do that, you have to create a session factory object, and this session factory is annotation based we are using. So we are using new annotation configuration.configure, and we are passing the configuration file and then calling build session factory to get an object of session factory. Now this session factory is used to create a session. You could have session factory to open session, and you can store the session object inside a session instance. And using this session object, you can begin the transaction, save the entity, and then commit the transaction and close the session, and finally shut down the session factory. If you forget to close the session or shut down the session factory, you are leaking the resources. Moving to next question. Which is thread safe, session factory or session? Session factory is thread safe. Session is not a thread safe. Moving to next question. Tell me about Hibernate persistence lifecycle. There are three states in Hibernate persistence lifecycle. These are: first is transient. A transient state is stored in heap. It is not associated with any session object. It does not have any identifier because it is still not persisted in database. If you want to persist any transient, you can use sessions and session methods. To persist a transient object, you can use session and its methods like merge, update, save. Next state is persistent. Persistent means object is stored in DB now. It would have an identifier associated with it. Any property change in object will be updated in DB also when the commit is done. Detached is the third and the last state. Detached means object was stored in DB. Now the session is closed or evicted, due to which it is not associated with an identifier. Any property change in the object will not be updated in the DB. If you want to convert detached to the persistent again, you have to associate it with session again. Moving to next question. Can you write a simple entity class? This question tests your understanding about Hibernate. I am saying this because if you look at this question, it seems to be a very simple one, but sometimes we forget about a few very important basic things that Hibernate require. Let's see what are those things. So for a simple entity class, if I say I would have a class named, let's say, Byte programming. Let's say we have only two fields right now, ID and name of type int and string respectively, and we have a default constructor or no argument constructor, and then we would have getter and setter for this ID and name, and equal and hash code, or maybe toString also. Also, if we are willing to have deploy somewhere in cloud or used for networking, we would implement serializable interface with this class. So if you look at this class, it is containing only two fields. But in a real-time project, a class generally contains at least 7 to 8 fields mainly. So just imagine a class having 7 to 8 fields with getters and setters for each field. Again, you have equals and a hash code with all the fields, toString with all the fields. So only for 7 to or 10 fields your code for an entity class would look cumbersome. So the next question an interviewer may ask you how to make this class clean. Moving to next question. How could you make this class look clean and readable with minimum number of code lines? When I say I want to make this class clean and readable, first remember that the basic functionality needed to have an entity class you cannot remove. So you should have a class name, let's say any name, it would be Byte programming or something, and again you would have fields, right? You can't remove fields to make your class look clean. So the basic requirement would be fields and a default argument constructor. Again, to access this class, you would require getters and setters, and if you're implementing equals hash code, you would require that. But think of that again. Writing getters and setters, writing equals and hash code, writing a default or no argument constructor or an argument constructor can we use any of the library present in Java J2E world. So if you remember, we have Lombok project in Java J2E world, and this Lombok provides annotations. So you can use for getters and setters @getter and @setter annotation. For the no argument constructor, it is @no args constructor. So using this @getter @setter @no args constructor on the top of the entity class, you are removing the code for getters setters default constructor. Even you have @equals and hash code annotations present. So the entity class would contain only your fields right now, and all the things that you require for this entity class to make work will be available as annotations. Moving to next question. It is mandatory to provide no args constructor in Hibernate. Yes, it is mandatory to have a no argument constructor or default constructor. This is one of the reasons an interviewer asks you to write an entity class, because it may happen that you already knew that it is mandatory to have a no args constructor, but still you forget to write a no argument constructor. But why a no argument constructor is really required? Hibernate creates object of entities using reflections constructor.new instance, or you can say also class.new instance method. This new instance method requires a no arg constructor, at least having package visibility of the constructor is required for runtime proxy generation in Hibernate. If not found, it will throw instantiation exception. Now you can look how a simple default no argument constructor is how much important in Hibernate. This is because Hibernate mostly worked in proxy. Hibernate generates so much performance because of use of proxies, and for proxies to work you would have the instantiation of the class with the reflections APIs, and this reflection API uses .new instance which require a no argument constructor. Moving to next question. Can we make an entity class final in Hibernate? This is also one of the reasons an interviewer asks you to write an entity class. If an interviewer asks you to write an entity class and make it final, so either way he have the opportunity to either enter the Java with the use of final, then finally, and again move on to the Java keywords and then go to the basics of Java, collections, threads, and ask these questions. Or it may happen that interviewer would dig much more deep in the concept of Hibernate. More or less, this question tests your understanding of Hibernate, how Hibernate works, and how much basic knowledge you would have in Hibernate. We can make the entity class final, but it would impact the performance of Hibernate. Hibernate uses proxies for implementing key features like lazy loading, lazy association fetching. Method like load works on lazy loading, and proxies. For a class to have a proxy, the proxy class must satisfy is a relationship with that class. And in order to implement an is a relationship, the proxy class either use extend or implement keyword. To use an extend keyword, you have to inherit that class, and to use implement means you are implementing an interface. So an entity class could be an interface so that a proxy could be generated, or it could be a simple class with no final methods so that it could be extended in runtime by the Hibernate to create proxies. By making a class final, Hibernate will not be able to use proxies. So this is the reason why we should not make an entity class final in Hibernate. If you want to do some experiment and want to see how this entity class making final affect the performance of Hibernate, create a project and have an entity class, and then try to use load method. So when you use load method with an entity class not final, and if you have turned on the SQL logging features in the console, when you save or try to get a class name of the entity class using load method, you will see the query generated is a proxy query. So the name of the entity class saving would be like byte programming underscore dollar dollar something like this, not actually byte programming. But when you make this class final, let's say I can make the entity class byte programming as final, and again if you do the same operation and if you see the logs in the console, you can see the class name generated is only byte programming, not a proxy class name like byte programming underscore dollar dollar something like that. So this was all about basics questions of Hibernate. We will look for more interview questions of Hibernate in next video. Subscribe and stay notified to get notification for more upcoming videos.